The Church of Scientology is making headlines again this week for its controversial stand on the right to repair its e-meters. Leah Remini has filed an amended complaint in her lawsuit against Scientology, and is church leader David Miscavige violating one of the most sacred rules of the Sea Org? All of this and more in today's edition of After Scientology, Straight Up and Vertical. Hello and welcome to After Scientology, Straight Up and Vertical, the weekly show where Tony Ortega and I go over the Scientology-related stories posted on his blog over the last week. These are news articles that are absolutely fascinating, and this week there were a ton of them. Tony, welcome back to the show.
Great to be back, Chris. Thank you.
Absolutely. So we got a lot to talk about, so let's literally just hit it. First off, there was this wildly popular story. It was actually even popularized on a very large YouTube channel about Scientology's right to repair, referring to their e-meters and them filing some letter that became public about this. Do you want to talk about this?
Yeah, that's definitely part of what makes this story interesting is the reaction from the media, because this is a public letter on a federal website. So it's fair game for anybody to write about. So a lot of news organizations that care about the right to repair movement and about software and that kind of thing, they're writing about Scientology, and they normally never do. And so, of course, they're all kind of like, well, what is ASI? And how is it related to Scientology? And that's cool. They all did a very good job with it. Basically, there's increasingly the devices we buy from people are so complex, and they break in a year, and then we have to replace them. And it's such a waste, and it's such a unsustainable thing. There's been this right to repair movement that says, no, you should be able to open up your Apple iPhone or whatever, and some expert should be able to fix the thing so it lasts longer. And of course, Apple and all these others are like, no, you void your license, you cannot touch that. So there's been some fight. There's some pressure to have litigation to allow people to overcome these manufacturers, and it involves automobiles and computers, and it's been gaining steam. Well, Scientology entered a letter to oppose that, and it was specifically for an attorney for ASI, Author Services, Inc., which, if you know the history, Scientology went through this massive reorganization in about 1981 when L Ron Hubbard had, gone through a litigation scare, and he wanted to make it more complex and more difficult to sue him and get to his money. And so he created this alphabet soup of nested entities. And there's RTC and CSI and ASI and all these different things. And, Denise Brennan, boy, I sure miss her. She had some great words for me about how she was right there on the spot when all that was made. She explained how this was all just a smokescreen to make it more difficult to get to L Ron Hubbard and his money. But basically, all of it, every single entity is subservient to the Sea Org. And the captain of the Sea Org is David Miscavige. And that's why David Miscavige rules over every single thing in Scientology. So a letter from an attorney at Author Services is not a letter from a literary agency that represents L Ron Hubbard apart from the church. No, it is a letter from David Miscavige. And the reason they don't like the right to repair idea is the e-meter that they ask everybody to spend $5,000 each on is actually a super simple device. All it does is measure skin galvanism with a very simple electrical device. But it's got, over the years, the newer models have more software in them and more requirements. And so Scientologists, when they buy an e-meter, they sign a pretty serious licensing agreement, and they are not supposed to open those things up and look inside and try to figure out how they work. So Scientology is alarmed by this idea of litigation that would allow people to do that. And so they oppose it. I mean, it's simple as that. They don't want people looking inside a $5,000 e-meter and realizing there's only about $100 worth of components in there. So that's all this is about. I understand why people are finding it to be an irresistible story, and they think it's funny, and they're trying to figure out what ASI is. But ultimately, I would be absolutely floored if the government paid more than 1 second attention to this letter, because as some of the experts are pointing out, what they're asking is they're saying, okay, we understand people want to open up their iPhone and people want to open up their car, but what about a device you have to be trained to use? And then they just bring in this whole thing like the e-meter is this special religious device you have to be a minister to use. And so they want there to be an exemption like that, so that, if it's a device that you have to be a trained professional to use, then that should be exempt. And, the experts are saying if you do that, every single manufacturer will then come up with some bogus thing like you have to be a professionally trained driver to use this car. Therefore, you can't. This doesn't fit the right to repair. In other words, it would give a loophole that everyone would use. So I just don't see this getting much traction, but it is a fun one-day story.
Absolutely. And also, I will comment on the fact that this had the maybe unintended, but I think intended and secondary effect with Scientology of, when they black box this e-meter where you're not supposed to open it, and the software actually shuts it down if you do not plug it back into the internet and prove to Scientology on a specific website they set up that you're a member in good standing. If you don't have that, that meter stops working. I've actually got one, and it doesn't work, right? For that reason. And that was one of the intended consequences of this, is to shut down independent Scientologists, people leaving the church, right?
And so they don't want people opening them up and figuring out a way to defeat that.
That's right.
And so that's again why they want this legislation to give that exemption. Exactly. It's a great point, Chris.
Yeah, it's quite interesting. Just all the little stupid things these guys do to just keep control. That's all they want, because control equals money.
Chris, is that if Scientology was going gangbusters and it had hundreds of thousands of people and they were selling tens of thousands of these devices, yeah, I could see them being very interested in this litigation. But right now, where they're hurting so badly, they cannot be selling many of these things right now. And yet, Miscavige has got some attorney, they never give up. I mean, it's just another sign that this really can't mean that much money to them right now, but they just keep fighting in every little corner they can.
That's right. And on that line, it really is a little bit of an interesting look into it, having been there, right? How serious they take themselves and how important they think they are, Anyway, it's ego unrestrained. Now, speaking of ego unrestrained, this next story, oh my God. I mean, I can't help laughing and crying at the same time because it's just so sad. L Ron Hubbard 2.0. Okay, so who is this guy? Now, there's a whole backstory. You don't have to get into all the details, but you want to give the overview on what's up with this guy?
Sure. So back around 2018, I keep an eye on the free zone, Chris. Of course, I'm watching the Church of Scientology, but I am interested in the small independent Scientology movement, because they will openly talk about things that church members won't. And so it's fun to watch free zoners discuss OTs and thetans and havingness, because that Scientologists in the church are having those same conversations. We just don't get to see them. So for that reason, I've always paid attention to the indies, even though it's a very small community. And around 2018, there was this stir in the movement that L Ron Hubbard had returned in the form of this guy in Washington who had legally changed his name to Lafayette Ronald Hubbard. And I found out who he really was. His name was Justin Craig. And I just decided to look into his criminal history. He had quite a criminal history. I got him on the phone. We talked about it. I quizzed him a little bit, and he couldn't even remember what the actual L Ron Hubbard called his wife. And at that point, when I stumped him on that, he said Mary, but actually Hubbard called Mary Sue Susie.
Right.
And so when I stumped him on that, he then claimed, I don't have previous life recall. I'm like, okay, he's changing the goalposts, right? So anyway, it was a wonderful moment. And I think a lot of people were like, okay, we've been warned. This guy's just a grifter or whatever. But then he went through some rough times with the folks up there with some of the indies. But, there were these indies that swore by him, that said he brought some new tech that was really kick-ass, and he really is Ron returned. And he went off my radar for a little while, and then he showed up again in jail in Tennessee. And it turned out he'd been picked up. He was living in a hotel. Initially, it was like illegal confinement or whatever you call it, sort of like kidnapping. Like he had somebody in that room against their will, but that charge was dropped.
Okay.
But they did find drug paraphernalia and heroin and fentanyl in his room. So he went to jail facing these various charges. And then once he got to jail, he got in some scraps and he got charged with additional assault. So now he's in jail on a $500,000 bail. The DA told me his nickname there in Tennessee is the Beast.
Wow.
Yeah.
Wow.
And we've just been waiting to see what happens with this trial. It keeps getting put off. It was supposed to be August. Now it's October. I could not get his attorney to send me return a message. So I don't know. But in the meantime, he's got followers that still believe in him and send him money. He followed up being L Ron Hubbard 2.0 to creating something he called Asparianism, which is his offshoot of Scientology. And you can go to the Asparianism website and sign up to send him money every month. And apparently people do.
Yeah. And
then he, through some intermediary, puts posts on Facebook and updates people. He's always telling people he's about to get out of jail. I don't know, maybe, I don't know. But this most recent thing, though, that was interesting was Patricia Krennic, who's very well known in the independent field. She's up there in Washington. My understanding was that she had kind of disowned him and kicked him out. And after some time, she has now decided to tell her story about finding him, because I think a lot of people say that her vouching for him is what really launched his L Ron Hubbard 2.0 thing.
Yeah.
And you actually got a hold of that document, forwarded it to me. I realized that, not everybody who reads my blog or watches your videos cares about the independent movement, but some of us do, and we realize it's really kind of fun. And I knew that they would just love to read this statement from her. And she talks about how he showed up and impressed everybody, and she decided he really was who he said he was, and then put him through certain things. It's a fun document. She's, years later, she's having some second thoughts, but she got heat from people saying, what are you talking about? You're still endorsing the guy. You're still calling him Ron 2.0. And I got to say, Chris, based on what she wrote and some of the responses to what she wrote, there are people out there that think this guy is the returned L Ron Hubbard.
Yeah. Yeah. And it's unbelievable. I wish I could say it was the only place and time this has ever happened, but this is such a common cult phenomena, you could say, right? It happens so often. Tends to be Jesus, not L Ron Hubbard. This is the first time I think anybody has seriously taken L Ron Hubbard and run with it the same way. But this is more common than you might think out there. And the same, I just got to comment on this, that the same thing that got him in Scientology, when you get out of these groups, when people come out of these things, if they don't deal with the problems and trauma and issues that got them in there, they're going to go right back into something else. And this is probably the most blatant classic example of how a literal criminal can take advantage of people, and they will follow him and still send him money. I think it's something on the other, a few tens of people or something are actually still supporting this guy.
I'm not sure how many, but there's at least a number of people that think he's the real deal and send him money every month.
Yeah, it's crazy. And you can see how blatantly nuts it is in these extreme examples like this. But, honestly, if I had to say what L Ron Hubbard would look and sound and do if he were to come back around, I mean, got to say this guy kind of fits the bill, especially with all the false imprisonment and drugs and everything else. I mean, he really is kind of channeling Hubbard in so many ways. Okay, but let's move on. Now, there was, okay, here we go again, round and round with the Miscavige service. This just seems like a almost carbon copy report at this point. What's up this week on that?
Well, and I just want to remind people that you and I know Dave is probably living in Florida, and he's, shuttling between the Hacienda and the Flag Building and the Fort Harrison.
Yep.
However, when Leah Remini was still in the church, what she told me was she liked to send Shelly cards and gifts. She was always told anything for Dave or Shelly goes to their official address, which is 6331 Hollywood Boulevard. Mm-hmm. That's the Hollywood Guarantee Building. It's got the L Ron Hubbard Life exhibition in the ground floor. And up on the 11th floor are the offices of the RTC, Religious Technology Center, which Dave is the chairman of. That's why he's known as COB, chairman of the board. Mm-hmm. Okay, that's the basic setup. And if you go online and look up sort of legal records and you want to know what David Miscavige address is, it'll come up again and again, 6331 Hollywood Boulevard. At the very least, it is the home of the organization he is the chairman of. And so, yes, you would say it is his place of business. So now that there's a lawsuit from Jane Doe 1 being handled by Graham Berry sent service and got served Church of Scientology International and Bridge Publications and RTC. But where do you serve Miscavige? Well, again, 6331 Hollywood Boulevard. And that building has two entrances. On Hollywood Boulevard is 6331. On the other side, it's 1710 Ivar Avenue. Mm-hmm. So he sent process servers to both entrances, two different process servers. They encountered workers. They said, I have something for David Miscavige, dropped papers on the ground and left. And, in the rest of the world, Chris, that's good enough. That substitute service, you're never going to find this guy standing around, but you give it to one of his minions at his office, and that's good enough. So before the judge can rule, David Miscavige's personal attorney, Jeffrey Riffer, comes to court. And see, this is like, especially people from overseas, they don't understand this. It's like, wait a minute. So Miscavige's attorney comes to court to tell the judge that they're not aware there's a lawsuit against them.
Right.
It's this insane American legal thing where he goes and says he has not been properly served. This is not where he lives. It's not where he works. These were not his employees. And, this is Jeffrey Riffer. Jeffrey Riffer, we've been, remarking on him for years. He's actually the one, thanks to Yashar Ali's reporting, we now learn that it was Jeffrey Riffer who was with Shelly Miscavige when they met with the LAPD back in 2013. Jeffrey Riffer is there to do Dave's dirty work.
That's right.
Okay. Mm-hmm. And we've seen him in the past put in these bombastic, just wild court rulings where he acts all offended and everything. This time he was a little calmer. And I think possibly because last year when they were trying to serve Dave in Tampa, I pointed out that the Tampa Scientology attorneys were saying David Miscavige is a 40-year resident of California. And Riffer in the Bixler lawsuit had mocked the plaintiff saying, you're trying to find him at 6331 Hollywood Boulevard. Everyone knows he lives in Florida. Oops.
Yep.
Right.
Yeah.
So I'm trying to point out if these judges would just compare notes that the Scientologist attorneys are just lying their asses off saying anything possible to keep Dave out of the lawsuit. So this time he was a little less sort of screechy. I think he pulled it back a little bit. All he said was that Dave doesn't live there. He didn't say Dave's in Florida. You guys are stupid, like he did last time. So we'll see what the judge says. I mean, they always make it sound like these process servers were the worst ever and did the worst possible job, and everything's on camera and they've got some photos. But it's just like, what are they supposed to do? He's the chairman of the RTC, and that's where the RTC offices are. So you drop the papers off with somebody that works there,
exactly.
And I think in Florida, those plaintiffs, the Valeska Paris's attorneys, did such an extensive job sending papers to Miscavige in California, in Florida, multiple times, documenting everything. The court finally did conclude, yes, David Miscavige is evading service and he is a defendant. But then that case got forced into arbitration, and that's on appeal. So that's why I wonder what are these California cases going to have to do? Because the Bixler case never successfully served Miscavige 2 years ago.
Mm-hmm.
And now the Jane Doe 1 case is going to be combined with that. So they're going to have to figure something out to convince these judges that serving him at that building is sufficient.
That's right. That's exactly right. A couple of things on this. One, just so everybody kind of knows this, because I don't know that anybody's really brought this specific point up before. But when I was in the Sea Org in Los Angeles, there was a specific drill that we had to do base-wide on not being served and not accepting service. And this was a noteworthy thing that I remember 30 years later. So clearly it was put in with some importance. It was like, do not touch that piece of paper no matter what you do. That was the key thing we walked away from. And I remember one time there being service tried at Asho across the street from where I worked at Big Blue. And there was the piece of paper right there. And there were 3 security guards stationed around it. Don't touch, don't go near, go around. I mean, they have this down. Like, do not touch. And I don't know if everybody realizes this or not, but it costs money to get a process server to go try to deliver service. And in that Bixler, in that Florida suit, I think the number was like 35 or 36 times or some ridiculous number. That's like part of your legal budget just trying to serve this dude.
I know. As long as we're talking about this, we might as well. Now, this is Graham Barry trying to serve the suit. Let's go ahead and give Graham his due.
Yeah.
Because the most famous thing was in 1990, around then, or maybe a little later. He was handling the which lawsuit was it? The Michael Pattinson lawsuit, I think, possibly.
Mm-hmm.
Faced the same problem. So they sent process servers to Winter Wonderland and went in and started serving celebrities.
Oh, wow.
And it caused such an just, you can imagine, people were freaking out. And then it was like, okay, Mr. Miscavige accepts service. It's like, I don't know exactly, but basically it worked. I just know it worked. And that Scientology said, we'll take the lawsuit, because, Graham was smart enough to go after the celebrities.
Wow.
I don't know. Maybe he's going to have to do that again this time. I'll have to check with him.
Yeah, I'll tell you, it's that kind of thing. You gotta get in there and roll your sleeves up and get into the mud with these guys, because there's just, otherwise it's going to just take months and years of so much wasted time on purpose by Scientology. This is the kind of thing where it's not even, we talk about all the scorched earth tactics they do in the courtroom. Most of their shenanigans are outside, and it's just ludicrous. Okay. Speaking of legal shenanigans, but this time, Leah amended complaint on her lawsuit against David Miscavige, and this detailed even more nonsense from Scientology. Do you have comments on that story?
Yeah, that was interesting because, she's put out this really detailed 64-page complaint about her background in Scientology. We've talked about how she's detailed these really interesting ways that Scientology has impacted her financially that are probably very effective in a lawsuit like this. And so then now we're just waiting for Scientology to answer, right? Mm-hmm. And we've changed judges twice already. To me, I just thought, okay, now we're waiting to see what Scientology says. But Leah's not waiting around. While they were serving papers on the new judge and everything, and notifying everybody about the new changes, they went ahead and added some material to the complaint to make it an amended complaint, specifically about the ways that fair game is continuing against her and Mike even after she's filed the lawsuit.
That's right. Absolutely shameless.
That kind of thing. So,
yep.
Scientology's on notice. If you're going to keep doing this, it's just going to keep adding to the lawsuit.
What else? It almost feels a little bit like, well, what other tool do they have? Because these courts just kind of roll over with this stuff. It is really frustrating watching it happen. And good on Leah and her team for pushing on this. That's what it takes to get this to in front of the judge and make it happen. And of course, it does need to be commented on. I don't think it's important. Mike Rinder is getting treatment for cancer right now.
Right.
This is not a small thing.
Right. They're sending PIs after him while he's going through cancer treatments. Come on.
I mean, Jesus, guys. It's so heartless what this group is really all about. And having been in it for so long, it's so just even now. I mean, I'm enough out now at this point that it's not something I'm connected with anymore. But to think I was part of that for a while, I mean, it's such opposite world in there. They feel so righteous in what they are doing. And it is so deceitful and wrong. It just is beyond any human decency. And finally, human decency, David Miscavige, 2D rules, and his assistant, Lou. Now, this was a story that hit me right, and I'll explain why, but please, this one is quite something.
Right. Well, Mitch Brisker's a very interesting guy. He was the guy that was directing all their films. He designed some things. He designed that L Ron Hubbard life exhibition at the HGB. Really important figure in Scientology. Just came out a couple of years ago. He's got fresh intel. Great guy. And he had told me this story, and I was kind of sitting on it a little bit. He asked me to sit on it for a little while, but then he decided, let's go. And because it's important, one of the things that people always ask me, I'm sure they ask you.
Oh, yeah.
Is that, okay, so Shelly was sent up to Twin Peaks in 2005. Leah realized she was gone the next year when she saw Dave playing grab ass with his secretary, basically, Larice Stuckenbrock, Larice Henley Smith.
Mm-hmm.
And that shocked Leah, and she realized something was very wrong. And then 2 years later, in 2008, the four of them, Tom Cruise, Katie Holmes, David Miscavige, and Lou, were photographed at a motorcycle race in Laguna Seca in California. Mm-hmm. So, besides whatever Shelly knew that he decided was too dangerous or whatever, there's always been this feeling, well, Dave kind of replaced Shelly with this, communicator, which is basically a glorified secretary, right?
That's right.
Lou, and that there's some kind of a romantic relationship there. Well, that's 15 years ago, Chris. I mean, I don't know, is David Miscavige still into his communicator all these years later? So this was a very interesting new data point from Mitch Brisker that in 2017, which is not just yesterday, but it's a lot more recent than 2006 or 2008, right? In 2017, Mitch was working at ASI on a Narconon promotion when Dave asked him, do you want to go over to England with us to the IAS gala? And of course, when Dave asks you that, you only have one answer, and that's yes, sir. So he got his stuff and got on the plane, and he was describing the whole. I got him to give me as much detail as possible about the other passengers, Diana Hubbard. He said the stewardesses were the flight attendants were amazing. He said They were like supermodels with black belts.
That's right. Lethally beautiful, he said.
They look more like bodyguards. Anyway, and they had this incredible food and everything. But so they left in the late afternoon for an overnight flight to Gatwick Airport. And he said, basically the entire flight, they never saw Dave and Lou, who were in the cabin in the back.
Right.
So the implication was they're a couple. They're sleeping together in the suite. And of course, he can't swear that they were having sex back there or anything. But he reminded me that in the Sea Org, there are these 2D rules referring to the second dynamic, which is relationships between men and women. And just what he witnessed with his own eyes, Dave and Lou locked in a room all night, was completely against those rules. Remember, Dave still wears his wedding ring with Shelly. So I thought it was a really important story. I think it does suggest that, at that point, 12 years after he had banished his wife to this small mountain compound, he's still treating his communicator, Lou, like his 2D. his romantic partner. And I asked Mitch, I said, okay, it's been 6 years. Do you think that's still the case today? He said he thinks it is still the case. But of course, he's been out for a couple of years. But, I think it's an important sighting. I think it's an important thing to keep in mind, and it helps us understand why Dave is not going to trot Shelly out or, even acknowledge that he put her away. He's got something else going on.
That's right. That's exactly right. And I'll go even so far as to say, I wonder, given the bubble world that Scientologists are in, and if her being up at CST is about as bubble world as you're going to get in terms of locked away, not on or knowing what's going on in the world. It's not like they're on the internet looking at the paper every morning and this kind of thing, going through their Google News. It could well be as insane as this might sound. I'm not kidding. It could well be that Shelly Miscavige has no clue about any of this media. And Dave is going to be the last person to tell her about it. And this 2D rules thing is not a joke. It's not just like, oh, that's cute. It's kind of life or death in the Sea Org. I did a 3-year RPF program because I talked dirty with a married woman, and I was married, and we weren't married to each other, for talking dirty on the phone. Never even touched that way. And I went to the RPF for 3 years. That's how serious they take this stuff. And I was far from the only person on that RPF who was there because of the violations of 2D rules. And I just want to, for the audience, I want you to get a couple points of this so you kind of get what we're talking about. This is a Hubbard reference from 1978. And it's every Sea Org member gets this practically on day one. This is a part of the boot camp hatting, the training you get. 2D couples, romantic couples, may not live or sleep together under any circumstances unless legally wed. Legal marriages are required. And then 2, SO members, it's with the public. Point number 4, no new 2D relationships may be created while one or both members are legally married to another person. It is the ethical responsibility for one to terminatedly end cycle finish on a 2D before starting up a new one. Adultery is against the law. And women have their own quarters. Men may not enter these, and vice versa. So there it is, right from Hubbard. So this business that Miscavige is only interested in forwarding Hubbard's word and every word is law, that's just total horseshit. And here's the proof right here, right? So got to comment on that just because it really hit me like, oh, screw this guy.
And let's remember those rules were written by a man who in 1946 was married to 2 women at the same time.
That's right. For a year without them knowing about it, without either one of them knowing. That's who L Ron Hubbard was. So as hypocritical as this is, the Sea Org members take this really seriously. And so this is actually kind of one of those things that, were it actually to be exposed to Scientologists and the Sea Org especially, could really have repercussions. Mm-hmm. Just putting it out there. If anybody knows anybody in the Sea Org. All right, that being said, Tony, this was a pretty bang-up week. Any comments on anything else or previews of this week?
Well, the big event this week will be the sentencing of Danny Masterson on Thursday.
Yeah.
Like I told people, I can't be there because I had surgery. I'm recovering very well, every day a little better. And the doctor is very happy. He said surgery went just perfectly. So I'm real glad I'm recovering, but I'm sad that I won't be in LA for that sentencing. However, a couple of reporters are helping us out. Should be really interesting. And I think everybody's anxious to see just how hard Judge Charlene Olmedo throws the book at Danny Masterson.
Yeah, big time. Looking forward to it in a way. I mean, this is a big deal. And a Scientology celebrity going to jail for crimes like this is not a small deal. And it's going to be another reason why his name and Scientology is going to be plastered all over mass media for Thursday, Friday, Saturday, Sunday next week. So yeah, I think this is going to be good. All right, thank you very much, Tony, for helping me with this. Folks out there, sign up on Tony's Substack if you're not already. Get those notifications, get those daily emails. Sign up, rather subscribe to this channel so that you continue to get stellar content about coercive control, cults, and Scientology. And I will see you guys next week. Bye-bye.